Welcome to Valiant Growth, the podcast that empowers you to earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom through radical personal development. My name is Philip Frey, and today I'm bringing you an interview with Darrell Becker on the subject of nonviolent communication. The initial purpose of this interview was to be an introduction to NVC, but upon re-listening to it, I realized that the pace can be a little bit too fast, and we didn't really have the time to cover all the essentials. So I've recorded a separate episode where I go into more depth about what nonviolent communication, commonly abbreviated NVC, is, what some key concepts are. I recommend listening to that first in case you haven't done that, but I realized that sometimes you just have an episode downloaded and you want to go ahead with it. So I think you will still gain a lot of value even if you just go ahead and listen for the first time. We do go into the basic what is NVC type question, but I recommend coming back to it once you know the concepts. It was my experience that as I've deepened my understanding of NVC after the interview and I came back to edit it, actually it was recorded in August, so a few months later came back to edit it, I found an extra layer of value in what Darrell had to say. Very briefly, to give you the why of why you should listen to this interview and to help guide your focus and attention on your first listen. We talk about NVC as a tool, and specifically a tool that's used in the inner world and in the outer world. And Darrell's perspective is, as he says, that it's an inside job first. And in your inner communication, the communication with yourself, with or between parts of yourself, it is very useful as a means of, I think the best way I could put it is it's a methodology for identifying the best strategies, meaning that it's like a template. It's kind of a guide that makes sure that when you make a decision, when you adopt a strategy, when you decide how to handle a certain situation in your life, NVC gently guides you to consider all information, things like your feelings, things like your values that you hold that might not be explicit. And if you use the form that NVC gives you, you will simply be able to make much better strategies and just identify the right choices and therefore achieve the fulfillment of your needs and desires much more easily. It's also a tool that facilitates understanding, and it facilitates understanding between people, but also it facilitates self-knowledge because it offers a judgment-free, a very open mindset and the capacity to listen to opinions and ideas and perspectives, whether inner or outer, that we don't value or that we don't hold as our own or that contradict our own. One of the examples in our talks that you will hear is between a socialist and a voluntarist, which is kind of a free market capitalist-ish. That's the easiest way to explain it to a mainstream audience. And it focuses on how those two people can communicate, but that comes back to the inner world, where if you pay attention, you will very likely find certain perspectives and viewpoints and parts and strategies, I can call them in many ways, that contradict one another. And in my example that you will hear, it's a case of that, and Darrell will talk about how NVC can be used to facilitate between inner parts. And between other people, speaking NVC will help you humanize other people, which is incredibly valuable. It is a system for empathy. It is a structured way of speaking and thinking and listening that fosters empathy. And it might sound a little bit vague and a little bit theoretical, and I struggle at the moment to fully convey it in such a short intro. But that is really the benefit, and how that happens you will find out in the interview. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you implement NVC in your life. Here comes the interview. Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth. Today I have Darrell Becker on the show. And Darrell, I discovered him through the Anarcho Yakitalism podcast, through specifically a conversation that he had with Nick Hazelton, on the subject of NVC, nonviolent communication. And Darrell has a website called voluntaryvisions.com. Is that correct, Darrell?
That's my site. Yes, thanks,
right.
Philip.
So you talk about the Trivium method, nonviolent communication, and the Non-Agression Principle. So today I want to talk about nonviolent communication with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so psyched to be here.
My approach with today's interview, I want to do it a little bit differently. So my plan is to flip the usual approach on its head. And I'd like to begin with the sales pitch for nonviolent communication, and only later go into what it is, because it's a pretty big subject, and there's your great talk with Nick on it. There's a book, there are trainers, so it's obviously a complex thing. So before we get into what it is, why is it worth studying?
Well, Philip, I would start with understanding the anatomy of conflict and disharmony internally, that's inside of each individual, and interpersonally between individuals. So if you're going to go ahead and say, I would like to have less conflict inside of myself and between me and others that I interact with on the daily basis, or frequently at least, then my proposal would be, okay, so do you have a strategy for that? And is the strategy something that you could articulate? Is the strategy explicit, in other words? Is it describable? And how's that strategy working for you? So the answer for many people is no, they don't have a strategy, and which, as with many situations, when you don't have a strategy, results are very variable. So when you pick a strategy that has some degree of a proven track record when applied in a certain way, well, that would be why. If you want to create harmony inside of yourself, that's the first part that I promote, is this is an internal application. Different than the word communication might lead you to believe. This is an internal application that you can fully use completely on your own, needing no one else to actually participate with you on this. And you get serious bonus points and skill level by actually applying it interpersonally. So that's basically it. If you'd like to actually have an explicit way that's fairly easy and kind of an 8-step method, that's what I certainly bring to offer.
That sounds good. So you can choose between having no conflict in your life, or learning the method, right? Those are the two possibilities there.
Right. I would also, just to be clear, you could choose many methods that might indeed yield you a predicted and desired result. Say, to create harmony inside yourself and harmony with others. There are many methods that are provided out there by other individuals. I collect such methods and study them. For myself, I like to combine the Trivium method of critical thinking with nonviolent communication, also with the Getting Things Done methodology created by David Allen. But to start with, since we're covering nonviolent communication as one part of it, alone, that one is very effective. So that's what we're going to be covering today.
Yeah, that sounds great. So what kind of impact did it have on your life? I'm kind of curious how you discovered it, and what impact did it have?
I discovered it because I was listening to a podcaster named Wes Bertrand. He had a podcast called Complete Liberty. And around a certain, I'm not sure even, maybe like episode 100 or somewhere around the line, I don't remember which episode it was, he discovered nonviolent communication. He was describing it, and also it was a complete change in how he did his productions. It showed like a complete halt to the anger and frustration in his interactions with certain people who were interacting with him on a coercive basis, to what looked to me like a greater degree of power and stance and poise, where he was able to actually, gain what I saw as greater control over his own emotional components. And I was intrigued. And as he very clearly lays it out, because he's an excellent articulator as far as these methods go, I was very quickly able to grasp what he had to give and see the applications. And it completely went right in the same line with my studies of the Trivium method of critical thinking. So just in having someone lay it out there like that, that was like the first step for me. It was around 2009. And after that, it was just then finding ways to see about actually applying it and having a deeper knowledge of all of the major 8 components of it. And also understanding how other people use it, and understanding how, I would say, the inventor, Marshall Rosenberg, applied himself to it, since he also included some philosophical stances along certain lines, some of which I adhere to, and some of which I would have concerns about, so I don't adhere to. And, that's me trying to answer your question there.
Right. And when it comes to your personal relationships, do you use it, and how does it work? Did you convince other people to use it?
Yeah, I certainly use it internally, especially. So it's changed. My application of this method has helped me change my wording to get the results that I want. That's essentially it. I've been getting better at that over these years, since it's been about 7 years of first becoming aware of it and then more and more intensively studying it. Finding that it's an inside job, like a lot of things. That's the first step. And I had to discover that on my own. I didn't have people describe it as an inside job at first. At first, it was described as a communications method, so I was using it as a communications method. I didn't understand that the components of it really are best applied internally first and then externally second. And once I started doing that, my success rate in terms of how it was helping me feel more balanced inside, and then how it was helping me to create harmonious interactions with individuals, all relationships much improved on that one.
Yeah, and I find that very interesting, and I absolutely agree with you that communication is not always between individuals, but very often between parts of yourself. So that sounds cool. So so I hope the listeners are hungry at this point. What is the core idea of NVC?
Most of the core teachings that came from Marshall Rosenberg involve looking at the OFNR model that he taught, and a lot of people are teaching around the world at this point. O stands for observations, all the input sensory that comes in like a video camera would take in. Then it flows over to the other side of F. You guys over there, you can look up the OFNR NVC model in any search engine and follow along with what I'm saying. F is for feelings. So Marshall Rosenberg identified a variety of descriptor words for feelings, and that would be a way of people just essentially identifying emotionally what is going on, what these actual abstract qualities are. I presently like to label them down to happiness, to sadness, fear, frustration, and shame. Even though shame is kind of debatable as to whether it's actually a feeling or an intellectual evaluation. But still, it's something that could be qualified, and, it's an abstraction. And then from there it goes to N, which is needs in the NVC lingo. Needs is basically it's describing these abstract qualities that are essentially values and desires of every individual. They're qualities that motivate action. They motivate thought, they motivate feelings, and through those mechanisms, it motivates a person to act. So I like to also call them motivational factors. I like to call them abstract qualities that are desired. And very simply, I like to call them values and desires. But a lot of the NVC trainers call them needs. And they are, anyone here listening can go and look up the NVC needs inventory in any search engine and look that up. And finally, that flows to what's called requests, which, again, I would find could be a confusing term if you're thinking internally. Requests is often thought of as things that are said to other people, which is true. I like to identify this R as strategies and actions, including requests of other people. So I like to think of this as an inside job, not just as a communications between people method. The OFNR, observations, feelings, needs, and requests, that's a huge part of what is taught by many NVC trainers, teachers, and in general, NVC users out there. There are 4 other components of NVC in Marshall Rosenberg's book that are unfortunately not looked at nearly enough, in my opinion. They're very important, in my opinion. And those are the 4 Ds of disconnected communication, or life-alienating communication. Anyone out there, you can go and look that one up too. 4 Ds of disconnected communication, NVC, put that one in your search engine. And they are demands, that of making specific command-related forms that are kind of a form of requests, basically, though kind of a tragic way of doing it. Next would come to unrequested diagnoses. Labels, adjectives that are given to other people and they didn't ask for them. Next would come the deserve-oriented language. You deserve to be rewarded, Philip, because you were on time with this podcast. Or, you deserve to be punished because you said you'd be ready in an hour, Any type of deserve-oriented language or deserve-oriented thinking, I would add, is part of that D. And finally, denial of responsibility. Denying any responsibility of cause and effect of any kind. Denying an ability to respond, whatever that is, whether emotionally or otherwise. So, yeah, those are the components, and that's what it's built out of. The skillful application of knowing those components is another thing entirely.
I see. So let's slow down and let's kind of look at them separately, because now we gave the listener a big cocktail of capital letters. But so if we begin with OFNR. Can you give an example of how you use this framework? Let's begin with kind of vanilla, standard nonviolent communication theory. How would you practically apply this?
I practically apply it internally first.
Okay.
So first, I take in my observations, and I would include in my observations all the thoughts that I'm having too. Any evaluations, any judgments going on, that's all part of my evaluations. But I do try to keep in mind the objective parts that are not subjective, like what a video camera would be taking in. That's part of my observations that I certainly focus on. And I also keep in mind thoughts that are happening too. And then next, I would measure what it is that I'm emotionally feeling. It's called being emotionally literate. I'm capable of evaluating along those parameters of the 5 emotions that I named. That is happiness, which is signifying that I've got qualities that I want. Sadness, which is signifying I've lost things that I want. Fear, which is signifying that I'm actually afraid that I'm going to lose things that I want. Anger, which is signifying that I'm really wanting something and I'm not having it. And then, of course, shame, which is a combination of an evaluation and a feeling that I don't deserve something. And those are feelings to know. And once I know what I'm observing, including thoughts, and I know what I'm feeling, I can solve for what it is that I'm needing, which is what are my values and desires. So then I can finally use all of that to take practical action to get what I want. And I give you an example. I'm going to try to give you a good example. Today I observed that, so far you and me, we had mostly radio silence, and like in terms of we're not like basically messaging back and forth. And then all of a sudden I observed that, looks like you got a little train problem and you might be ready in an hour later than expected. So, okay. So I'm taking that in. That's my observation. I'm reading the message. I'm seeing it with my eyes. I'm thinking it with my mind. I'm having thoughts now. I'm thinking, is that going to push back my other things that I have going on today? So I can notice in myself a little bit of fear. Like, what about the next person after you, Philip? What do I do with that? What do I want to do? Because the next person after that is also very flexible, like you. So I think about that, and and I kind of notice a little bit of the fear of what the other person might say to me when I tell them that I'm going to be late, and then I understand. I solve for what is it that I value and desire, called needs in that lingo, and what it was I desired connection with that other person. I desired continuity, I said what I was going to be ready at that hour, and I want to be like fulfilling that. I want to keep in integrity with my words and actions. So there's a little bit of fear of breaking that. So in knowing that I want continuity, I also know what I want here. I want to make a good podcast for Philip Frey. So I want to make a great Valiant Growth episode. And I take steps then of strategy and action. I then, I see another message. Oh, actually, you are ready at noon. Okay. So now I notice, again, everything's changed again. I take in the message. Now I'm going back to the usual schedule. I notice that I'm happy because I'm keeping on schedule and I don't have to say anything to the other person. And I can move on. And I go to the next process, which is basically I see I have continuity, I have connection, and my taking action is to respond to you, saying I'll be ready at noon. I'm keeping the appointment, and goes back and round again. That's OFNR in a nutshell in a practical way. And I got to apologize, Philip. I wish I could come up with more creative and amazing examples of this, but actually you could help me do that by giving me examples of disharmony that we could focus on too.
Yeah, and you've just lifted the veil on the dark and ugly world behind podcasting. Yeah, yeah, keeping Skype appointments. Yeah. So I wonder in this situation, because this is, if I understand correctly, this is mainly aimed to be a conflict resolution system. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I would say that that's what a lot of people are publicly doing with this right now. Yeah. Not what I'm doing. I mean, like I said, for me, it's an inside job. Like, this is part of the tool set that I use for myself to balance myself. Look at it like martial arts, for example. Right now, martial arts are very popularly used as a form of self-defense and occasionally in competitive combat sports. And that's a huge and very popular application of it. However, if you go back and you actually look at the history of martial arts, you'll see that for the large part of it, for most people, it's a way of staying healthy because they were centuries-tested methodologies that flex and stretch and strengthen parts of the body that promote health. It's an inside harmony job, not so much of a self-defense or combat application job. See what I'm saying? So it's though not nearly as popular. And there's a lot of conflict in this world. So just as with martial arts being very popular as a self-defense and combat applications methodology, NVC, of course, has become very popular as an interpersonal harmony building methodology rather than the internal art that I'm describing.
Right. Well, I will say that I don't necessarily see a contradiction. Like, if I understand correctly, you use it as maybe as a tool of mindfulness. If listening to your example, but I think the way I understand psychology, there are many competing parts or kind of subconscious processes in our mind, and big shock that can lead to inner conflict. So I can envision it as a tool for that. So it's still also a conflict resolution tool, only focused inwards. Is that fair to say?
It's an and also situation.
Yeah.
It's not an either or. I think that's one of the most fundamental concepts that I'm often delivering to the students who are learning communication skills from me. I'm trying to promote the and also perspective. It's not an either internal application or external. When you have external conflict, that's the time to apply external methodologies. And this is an excellent way of doing that. However, just like with the skill of martial arts, if you have not trained internally, and if you have not balanced yourself internally, how are you going to make conflict resolution between yourself and another person? See? If you're out of balance, how are you going to help someone give them a helping hand up if you're going to fall over with them? How's that going to happen? So that's why I focus on the inside first, always. And then from there, you could find a way to make a bridge of empathy, a way of connecting to the other person in such a way as to make that practical harmony achievable.
Right. So yeah, I think that makes perfect sense to me. And so could it be used as an inner conflict resolution tool as well? Would that be a use for it?
That's exactly what I've been trying to describe, yes. It's
cool.
Brilliant as an internal method to measure harmony and to see how's harmony doing and to find a applicable way to get there, a practical way to make harmony inside. It's one way to do so. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to use that to give you an example, and I'm going to give you a real example. So listeners of Valiant Growth will notice that this is released after a 2-week hiatus. And I normally release 2 episodes a week. So this kind of be 4 missed episodes in total before the release of this one. Or perhaps the order will be switched around, but this is my situation. So I've had 2 weeks where there was a part of me that really wanted to maintain this rhythm because it's advantageous to be consistent, because it's a pleasurable thing of self-esteem, of building a general feeling of competence, and also perhaps because that part was a little bit afraid that, yeah, if I break the rhythm, then that's gonna be forever. Now there was another part in me which needed a little bit of rest. I had a few things happen to me. They were pretty intense. So it really wanted some rest. And as you can see, the two sides, the two parts, can be in real conflict, because one part wants to say, okay, let's go production, and the other side will say, no, let's do rest, nothing else. So how could I have used NVC in this situation?
Well, what I have written down here so far from your description is you were wanting to keep the goal of releasing every 2 weeks. You had things happen. Yeah. Okay. You want to release this twice a week.
Yeah.
Okay. But you had things happen requiring that, like showing you that you could benefit from having more rest, which would be releasing it less frequently. So So what you could use here is that you could actually identify what you actually feel about each choice of action. You would be able to see, what do you feel emotionally speaking? And you could also write down what you think, intellectually speaking, about each of those choices of action. You'd be able to say, identify, well, like literally, maybe you can tell me, Philip, what would you feel when you think about pushing through, regardless of your desires for rest, and keeping on the production? What's the emotion that you identify?
Yeah. So I actually said, just to be complete, so I said that there was a fear of breaking the cycle. So that's the emotion on one side, but on the other side of pushing through, I don't know how to name the exact feeling, but it's kind of the feeling of being disrespected, of being violated, of
Okay,
not
those
having...
are thoughts. But
Okay.
just to be clear, those are thoughts.
All
So
right.
you can put them down as thoughts: disrespected, violated. If you simplify it down to 5 feelings, let me tell you, it makes a world of a difference.
Okay, so give me the list and I'll
Happiness.
try to put it
Yep.
there.
It's real simple. Happiness is what you got it. Sadness, you lost it. Anger, you want it, but you don't have it. Shame, you don't deserve it.
Okay, so I guess it would be...
Fear, you're going to lose it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it would be anger in the system.
Good. See? It's liberating to actually name it that way. And also to name that you evaluate it as disrespected. You know, that's a thought. Let that happen too. Those are important. But it's a thought. You know, it makes a world of a difference when you actually separate the two. And you can use those two now to solve for what it is that you are valuing and desiring, and what are called needs in NVC lingo. So basically, it's like that. You would, be afraid, basically, of perceptions of what happens if you take a rest. You could be angry if you felt, I would say, maybe if you were evaluating yourself as obligated to continue with the two productions a week schedule. And it's an interesting thing because you could see with the fear is you could be afraid. You could be afraid of people out of you want continuity. You could be afraid of a loss of connection, people disconnecting from your productions because where's your production? It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And every podcaster knows this. If you don't have regular productions, you have a chance of losing listeners because people will think that you've pod faded, that you've stopped making productions, and who knows if you will again. They'll move on to other productions. You could feel the frustration because you want the rest, but you're afraid of the loss of listeners. So you want basically the continuity, but you also want to tend to your personal needs. You want harmony and health, which rest provides. So in knowing harmony, health, in knowing continuity and connection, those are the needs inventory list qualities that you can quickly identify. And then from there, you could apply yourself to say, is there a way that you can have both or all of this together? Are there other creative strategies to have harmony and continuity and connection and rest, health and rejuvenation? And that's where you get to be creative. Those needs inventory list qualities, those values and desires, are abstract qualities. Using them, you can be creative, and you could find, say, other ways. That's where it goes to the requests. In this case, a request of yourself. You'd be like, Philip, can you think of any other ways that you can also get these productions done while also resting? Or is this truly an either-or situation? Are there other things that can give in your life so that you can keep production up? Or is this the thing in your life that has to give? It's where you get to be creative. Are there other people who could come in and help you? Is anyone else able to come in and do that? It's where you can look at your strategies and then take effective action. So, did I describe how to use OFNR to that one?
Yeah, and I think in this particular case, we replace requests with, you use strategies and actions?
And actions. Yes.
Yeah, then that is really fitting. So I can see why you would do that. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think we covered a good example here. And just to complete the story, what I did, I kind of I mediated an inner kind of solution to this situation, not using NVC in that point because I wasn't familiar with it. And I said basically, if I am to stay productive and to do this long term, I simply need the rest. When I get back to it, I will recover and I will be rejuvenated, and that way both, and not at the same time, but in sequence, both needs can be met, and I think it worked out for me.
Perfect. Yeah. So this was, of course, an easy example because, well, your life was not on the line and important things were not on the line in general. It gets a lot trickier when you have the pressure turned up. And whenever those external pressures or internal pressures start rising, that's where the skill level tends to go down, just like in martial arts training. If you have that external or internal pressure rising, old patterns of lower levels of skill will begin to resurface because they were the default from long ago. This is where training consistently is really important in either case. I just wanted to emphasize that.
Right. So okay, so it's your turn. Can you think of a high stakes example and how it could be used in that situation?
Yes. Went to the post office yesterday to get my mail, and I found out that because I didn't pay for the box in time, as I was a bit slacking on that, my box is shut down. And I don't, unfortunately, I need to actually interface with my ex-wife, who is the official name on that box, and it never got switched over because I just kept, I was slacking on the whole thing. I never officially had the transfer of it is obscene. It's like, forms of ID and proof that you're living there and all these things like that, and both of us being present at the same time, just for a freaking P.O. box switchover. And because of all of that, I found like I couldn't get access to my mail, and they had it, and I couldn't pay for it and get to it. I have the money, but they don't even want the money. They want the other person and all these forms of ID. It's Kafkaesque. It's exactly all the problems of the lack of a voluntary world, obviously. So I was angry. I was frustrated. I have things to do, and now I have another thing to do. I needed to get back to harmony. I was under pressure. It was hot day, hot, tired. I was definitely losing my composure, not to the person, but just to myself, as it often happens while driving. And I took some time to find out what it was that I was looking for, which is, of course, ease and efficiency and harmony, and obviously connection to, in this case, my mail, and continuity. So things, you put them somewhere and they stay there. And yeah, once I identified all of that, I realized that I'm not going to get my needs met in those ways. I'm not going to have my values and desires for those qualities of efficiency and ease and harmony and continuity using that specific P.O. box, or probably almost any postal system, unfortunately. But I need some postal box at some point. So I thought about it, and then I made a strategy of finding a different P.O. place to get my box at, which is what I'm planning to do, is just to change it over to a different place. And to go, and actually I have to communicate to my ex-wife, and I have to show up there to pay to get my mail with her, and if everything else fails, then I have strategies to deal with that. So essentially, I found, that identifying, just stating aloud to my friend on the phone what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and having them hear me out, and like helping me find what the qualities were that I was after, and just in voicing all of that, getting to strategies that are going to be more effective with it. Calming down, writing down the strategies to myself, thinking about them, and then starting to take action, sending the appropriate text messages, etc. And then notice again, how do I feel? What's going on? How do I observe things now? So now it's a lot more calm, even though, it's a small obstacle, but I found my way through it. But at the time, it was like a big obstacle. I didn't know how I was going to get my mail. I'm expecting a check in the mail. I'm expecting a bunch of things. So at a time, that was a big deal.
Right. Yeah. And a careful listener will notice that how faithfully you followed the steps through it, even though you didn't name like this is O, this is M, this is N. You you went through it, right? The observation that there's a problem, the feeling which was anger.
There's some fear in there too.
Yeah, fear. And maybe sadness. I'm really enjoying your framework now. So perhaps
no, there was to go back through it. I'll do it. There was certainly sadness that I didn't take care of this adequately before. I've been slacking on this one. I let this one slide because they just keep sending a slip in there, and I just keep paying for the box instead of adequately flipping it over to, or like for that matter, paying for like the 6 months and then putting it in my calendar so it reminds me to pay every goddamn 6 months, like because they give you a 10-day grace period and then boom, and they got it, and they'll take it away from you, and it's not in like a form of like what do you call like a reminder, no, it's just like it happens, so it's because of the way it is. That's like sadness. And there even was shame, like as if like I deserve less respect because I'm a slacker in this and I don't have everything perfectly in my calendar. That's a negative evaluation of myself, ashamed to have dropped the ball on this one, metaphorically speaking. And I just, take the time to identify the qualities and the needs, as they are called, with essentially the continuity, the ease and efficiency, the harmony, and then make my strategies, and then take action that's effective. And go back through it again. Now that I've thought about all that, how do I feel? How do I observe the situation now? How do I next go to the F? How do I feel about the situation now? Which was happier. I don't feel the shame anymore. I don't even feel the sadness anymore, or the fear. I'm going to take care of it. And I certainly don't feel the anger anymore. It's kind of a done deal, And it's basically like that.
Yeah, and it sounds like to be, I'm guessing that because you've done this often enough, this is a very natural flow to you. Like I'm guessing you didn't have to break out a notepad and write the OF and R down and things like that, right? It feels pretty natural to your thinking at this point.
I've trained with this enough that no, I don't need to. I don't need to look at this model, and I certainly don't need to bring out the needs inventory list. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, in my phone, I had the needs inventory list right there. Bam! I could open it right up and just look at them and try to identify those qualities, because you can go and look at lots of them. There are a lot of needs inventory lists, as they're called, the lists of these abstract qualities that inspire feelings and thoughts, and thus inspire from that action. So just, to be clear, originally I used to have to look at these things to get this level of swiftness with application. No, now at this point I know the pattern pretty well. Right,
and that's nice. And I'm curious, so in an alternate dimension where you have a Darrell Becker who never went down this path, or someone else who's not familiar with the method, how do you think it would have went down in comparison? Like without this system, without kind of self-knowledge, awareness, things like that?
Well, that's just me multiple years ago, so it's not hard to imagine because I was right there. I would take in my observations. I would definitely notice the front feeling, the anger. I would miss the underlying feelings of fear and sadness and shame. I would really be focused on the anger, and I would externalize it and project it upon the stupid, effed up postal service person who's right there, the people that gave her all these orders to do. She could just easily she could, just like the cop could choose to not give me a ticket, she could choose to just take some money and give me my mail, she could, but she didn't, because she's obviously one of those people like that. And I could project it onto her, that it's her problem, that she doesn't understand the principles of voluntarism, and how this is a really Kafkaesque system, obviously, So,
yeah.
That would be essentially projecting it onto that. And I would be in a kind of like a loop like that, where eventually I would, of course, take strategies and actions to achieve that, but I would still be stuck on my thoughts, hating on the person, projecting on the person who taught the person who wrote the rules for the person, Basically, sometimes collectivizing, let's say like the entire state apparatus system, and being aggressively angry in my mind against them, verbally even too, and holding myself in consistent turmoil on that whole topic, instead of obviously like just finding appropriate action and moving on. That would be an example of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot of the things that you're saying, they are in some ways true. And I don't address too much politics and value and growth, but many of these things are true. But regardless, in the moment, what is actionable and what is going to make your life and your experience and your day better. And it isn't stewing on, like they should study the non-aggression principle and things like that. That's how I see it. Like, okay, I'm bringing Rothbard in, and I'm bombing the post office with copies of his treatises and things like.
Yeah, I find that to try to give people an education when they're not requesting it, not very useful. What I found as a perspective, Philip, is that one of the first things when I'm teaching nonviolent communication methodology, along with the other methods that I mentioned earlier, is that there's an opportunity, but not an obligation, to take 100% responsibility, defined as the ability to respond to all of my own thoughts and feelings, and certainly my actions. And in that opportunity, I find that there's power. So I identify what I feel as essentially similar to the skin sensations to tell me that my hand is burning because it's too close to the stove. The feelings are the same thing to tell me that I have qualities that I call values and other NVC users called needs that I am after, that I do not have, or I'm afraid or that I somehow evaluate that I'm likely to lose. And those are sensations. The feelings, emotionally speaking, are a sensation to help me, to guide me to where I want to go. And that this world can be taken as very similarly, like 100% responsibility to me is 100% attempt to respond how I wish to respond. Do I want to respond like a very out of control and petulant 3-year-old and just, have just look for someone else to take care of me? Well, in my lowest moments, yes, unfortunately, I've done that. And looking back on those times, I don't want to replicate that. What I want to do instead is to look at the person in the post office, the people who taught her, the people who wrote those regulations, all those things. The situation is no different to me than the clouds over the big island of Hawaii where I live. Out of my control in terms of I don't have a weather control device and I don't have a people control device. What is in my control is myself in terms of how I react to things. The emotions are there to tell me what I want regarding the qualities that I want. I take action according to, formulating strategies, and then after I take action, I evaluate how did that work for me. It's about that simple.
Yeah, and I enjoy the fact that now we have Stoicism in this episode as well, because that's kind of the idea. You're familiar, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're referring to maybe what are you referring to? Which part of Stoicism?
The practice of what is it? The areas of control, or maybe that's
spheres of influence, and
spheres of influence. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very important component right there. What's within my influence, and also what's within my sphere of concern too. Like, for example, is it within my sphere of concern that a certain political candidate took a bunch of donations and then possibly may have turned around and, since he didn't get elected, or since he dropped out of the political race, chose to buy himself a very expensive summer home? No, it's not within my sphere of concern. It's interesting knowledge, not surprising to me. Although I didn't absolutely verify the truth of it, personally speaking. But some people, I would say, unfortunately, too many people in the circles that I run in, they might not actually measure what's actually within your sphere of concern. They might be like focused on, well, certainly if you've interacted with people who would self-describe as socialist, and other people in general who are not very philosophically inclined, they might have a very, I would say, distorted version of what's within their sphere of concern, meaning that they actually are concerned about things that are really far away from them and also out of their sphere of influence, really out of, way beyond their control. And that, of course, is exactly what Stoicism as a practice was developed to help people stop doing and start actually focusing on what's within reachable realms of control and what is really important in terms of what's to be concerned about, such as like one's own life and finances and health and love life and all of those important things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I tell you, I really enjoy how these strands flow together. There are many separate ideas, and some are schools of philosophy, and others are communication techniques. Others are productivity techniques, but it kind of all it intertwines, and it creates this really rich tool set for a rich life. Yeah. And the listeners now they're getting 2 for 1, so this is definitely a great deal for them.
Right on, yeah. I really enjoy it because a lot of these things were developed a long time ago in slave using cultures of, pretty far away from where I'm at right now. And I would say this is a great time for the integration of all of these tool sets, for taking the components that are useful and certainly dispensing with ones that, like you could verify, are not so useful. So that's part of rational thinking, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's personal development, I would say.
Yeah.
So we talked about the inner focus, and Valiant Growth has parts of kind of self-knowledge, and it also has parts of relationships. So I think the listeners are interested also, and I'm interested also in NVC's external application. So let's say that we got the inner thing going. Can you give me an example of a conflict and how it is solved in NVC? And after that, I think that will lead to a common concern that people have. But before that, I would like to, see an example of how it would work interpersonally.
Okay. Well, interpersonally, you could have a person who's, has a strong opinion, politically speaking, and another person who has a strong opinion, politically speaking, in a different direction. Say one is very concerned with safety and security of poor people, and so the strategy that they would wish to promote is that of coercive redistribution of wealth and the utilization of governments to do so. That might be the philosophy that they're wanting to promote. The other person, say, is very concerned with what happens. They're concerned that would lead to many, many types of tragedies that are actually being enacted right now. The country of Venezuela is used by many people as an example of this. Socialism and in action right now. As far as what's going on, the United States is another good example for that matter as well. So when looked at that way, what appears to be going on is that these two people have a conflict of perspective. So say one of them is promoting to vote for a certain person who is promoting a certain type of redistribution of wealth. Another person is angry at them that they're promoting that and is wanting to teach them about the Non-Agression Principle, about voluntarism, that of promoting to not take anyone's stuff that is theirs and to not ever, cross those boundaries, to not hurt people and not take their stuff, but certainly to be able to defend oneself against such, and to not do to other people, or to not, I'd say, outsource violence that you personally wouldn't ever advocate that you have the right to do. We'll get into rights maybe at some point. And the other person wants to just basically is so focused on their strategy, that of voting for that person, that of the redistribution aspect of a monopoly government, that they don't want to relook at that. So here's how I would take the conflict if I was to stand in between those people and to say, I'm going to use my skills to help you have harmony. I would wish to understand, first, do they want to have harmony with each other? Because that's very an important goal right there. I would want to, if they really did want to have harmony because they actually did like each other, I'd want to focus on, well, what is it, literally, are you able to, are you interested and able to articulate back to each other what each other's views are? And what it would be the one person who's standing from the voluntarist perspective could say, I hear you that you are afraid of the inequality and the lack of justice and the lack of security that many people have. And I hear you also that, that this is really important to you because you want those pieces of safety and security. And I'm speaking right now to, that one person is speaking to the other person's qualities, the values and desires, which are called needs. It's a way of making a bridge. It's a way of demonstrating active listening. I hear you that your strategy to achieve that, the observations, the strategies, is to vote for this person. And then that would be did I get that right? That would be a question. Was I correct in that, or was I inaccurate in some way? Because please correct me. I'm doing the best I can. And that kind of humility, that type of connection, is making a bridge from one person to another by virtue of speaking to in this case, the needs or values and desires, the N in that part, or the O, the observations, what the other person said, or the R, I hear your request for me to vote for this candidate, Those are ways of making a bridge from one person to another, just by demonstrating active listening. It doesn't mean that you're saying, I'm going to go vote for that person. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It means that you heard them. And in that act right there, and using those parts, notice how I didn't say the feelings. In using those parts, it's a potential way for the person who subscribes to the voluntarist perspective, to the perspective of basically respecting people's ownership boundaries and property, to the person who is subscribing to a form of socialism, a form of coercive monopoly that redistributes wealth, that is in that philosophy for the good of all. So it's a way of connecting. To speak to the F is sometimes dangerous in the midst of a conflict. And here's why. If the two people are angry, then they might actually not want to hear about how they're angry, because that's sacred ground. For two people who love each other, and they make a consistent habit of acknowledging how each other are feeling, and that's something that they want to do, that could be a way of making a bridge. So, OFNR, speaking to the other person's observations or to what they specifically desire, their values and desires, what are called needs in that lingo, to speak to the other person's requests, to reiterate it back to them. Those are wonderful ways to try to demonstrate that you want to make a bridge of understanding, that you're creating clarity and understanding by reiterating back to the person, that's what you gave me. Am I right on that? Or did I get that wrong? I get it wrong sometimes. Humility, And that's a way of dissolve, the anger, you could notice, goes down a bit because that's an attempt at making connection. Some people really like it when you express, when you try to guess at what they're feeling. I have found that there are many, many instances where that is a very sacred place in a person, emotionally speaking. A lot of people, they might not even be aware of what they're emotionally feeling. A lot of people would find that that's a very sacred place, and only certain people have the authorization to mention what they're feeling. But for some people, that would be a very effective way. So this is using the OFNR part to make a bridge between two people. And the other person could do the same thing then. Hopefully, they would be able to speak to the other person what they are concerned with, what their thoughts on the matter are. They could speak to what the other person wants, which, of course, are similar qualities of safety and security. It's just achieved through different means. And they could also speak to different requests. The request of a voluntarist to say, how about you focus on agorism and making good businesses and excellent investment choices? And, to essentially take care of you and your own and make connections between you and as many people as possible so as to make a vibrant local community. So that's considerably more resilient to, the whims of a variety of dangers in this world. That would be a way of that person, it was just, coming from the socialist perspective. Is that what you were after? Is that what you're trying to claim right now? And this is just using half of NVC like that. The other half is very important too, by the way. Using the 4Ds to create a connection can be done too, in terms of the 4Ds are like a virus scanner or a firewall for the mind. They're also a translation matrix when they're coming at you. See, if the socialist-leaning person was demanding that person vote for Bernie Sanders as a candidate, just using it as an example, then the voluntarist person could translate that demand as a request, just maybe not so skillfully delivered, but it is a request nonetheless. And in doing so, they can see the rest of the OFNR in that request. They could basically see why would they be demanding this? Why the urgency? So that's one example. The others are a diagnosis. If anyone is giving each other labels, if you're an idiot. Oh yeah? Well, you're just totalitarian capitalist, labels like that. That's an unrequested diagnosis. You can translate the diagnosis. It shows what the other person is feeling. And hopefully, if you can skillfully do so, you can internally reduce the tension by knowing that a person gives you a diagnosis because they're putting you in a box for the purpose of clarity and understanding. Those are the qualities. Clarity and understanding. I'm sorry for you listeners and you, Philip, if I'm going too fast on this. But this is an example. And
yeah, I'm absolutely
the other two,
following it. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Yeah. And
you see the skill level involved, right? This is not beginner level skill. This is advanced. So
but it's a good sample for people, right? This is where you can get.
Yeah, this is one of those listen to it again and think about it perhaps. But the other two, deserve-oriented language. I deserve free healthcare. I deserve to have a free basic minimum income provided by the state, And that is, of course, it's a way of a person. You could translate deserve-oriented thinking as a desire for, that's again the needs inventory. What would they be after with that? Ease and efficiency, a sense of justice and equality. Those are qualities that they might be after by making statements that are very deserve-oriented. Reward me, punish them, that type of thing. And when translating it, it takes the pressure off. Oh, looks like they were after ease and efficiency and some form of justice and equality. Okay, I got it. And then finally, that denial of responsibility. That, I'm in no way basically like someone saying, I have to yell at you, Philip, because you made me angry, is a denial of responsibility. And that, again, could be translated as the person is just right now, presently, they're going to that lower skill level if they just want to abdicate. They want to just have ease and efficiency and not be responsible for the cause and effect of their choice of actions. And in doing that, especially the OFNR, but certainly the skillful use of the 4Ds is what I emphasize in my teaching. It's a way of applying it to conflict that I just described.
Oh, it seems really powerful to me, and I've read the first bit of the book itself, and from Marshall Rosenberg, and listeners can find it at valiantgrowth.com/NVC, an Amazon affiliate copy. He talks about really incredible results he personally or other people say that they have achieved through this method, and when it comes to interpersonal conflict resolution and kind of building bridges. And I believe it, and the reason that I believe it is that this is not kind of psychopath style stuff. Like, this is not a trick of, okay, these are the magic words and I say them, and or at least this is not how I see it. Like, okay, I use these formulas from a book and I can disarm this person. The way I see it is to be accurate and to be real about what you identifying the other people's feelings and needs and their requests. That requires a genuine empathy connection. It's how I see it. And that humanizes the other person to an extent that is unusual. And I think almost anyone would be really touched by that, even if it's ideal, it's completely different ideology, whatever, or it's a work situation and there's massive contradictory desires and things like that. That is such an incredible and rare gift in today's world, to be, to use Nathaniel Branden's, psychologically visible. I think that touches people.
I agree. And what you just mentioned was the concept of enemy imagery. To see the other person as the enemy and thus dehumanize them. To not see the value in genuine human connection is a problem. It's going to be an obstacle, because you literally are going to put yourself at a disadvantage as soon as you do that. What I'm looking to do, of course, is to make a neutral and then eventually a warm and connected version as far as a perspective goes. So like, I'm looking for an actual way to see the other person as very likely valuable to someone on this planet, very likely valuable in a variety of ways, not to see them as truly the enemy, as some type of mythical Sauron from the Lord of the Rings or something. This is a very valuable potential relationship. Not many people out there are truly extremely dangerous, violent people. Most people are just having struggles and misguided. And in a lot of circumstances, if they had all of the things on their needs inventory list tended to, they would be a danger to no one. And that's very simple. Of course, it's in the competition for strategies. That's where there's conflict. But not in the competition for these qualities, which are ubiquitous and abstract. So just to see the other person as a potential human right there, if that's not happening, that's why I asked that first question, do you want to have a connection with this person, before I would mediate between those two people? It was a very important question like that, because if you don't want that to happen, there's no point in going to the next step. There's like just no point, Come back when you're ready to see the other person as someone you want to connect with. These are skills to use when you do want to connect with someone, if you're using it as an interpersonal communication skill. Again, I emphasize, it's an internal application. Just to even have a metaphorical talk like this in your mind, or with other skilled practitioners like myself, a process that's called clearing in the Mankind Project. It's where you don't need that person that you have a conflict with to be right there. All you need is to simulate it to see what is it that you get out of holding the other person in your mind as the enemy. How does that serve you? And the answer is always something. It's always going to serve you in some way. Maybe once you see it, you might want to choose your strategy to change. You might want to choose to change that strategy. So enemy imagery is another perspective that is emphasized in all NVC teachers in general.
Something that I want to address here, and I think this has been probably an alarm going off, and it was in my mind, and it's probably in other listeners as well. And that is, because a standard approach is, okay, so this guy wants socialism, which means that he wants to take my property by force, to redistribute it. So he's basically proposing aggression against me. That is immoral. Therefore, he is evil as a person. He's an evil person. He's advocating for evil. And you cannot show empathy for evil. That is the biggest mistake that you can make, because evil people will abuse your empathy. And that is, I would say that given childhood, given things that happen to people, given how often trust is violated, that is not an unreasonable thing to say, not an unreasonable thing to be genuinely and realistically afraid of. If I humanize this person, if I reduce my capacity to be aggressive, but kind of in a defensive way of self-defense, am I not preparing myself for exploitation? So by using these strategies, am I not being kind of the fool in the equation? What would your answer be to that?
Well, first of all, if we just go over what I've just said for this whole discussion, I started with saying these are things that you apply internally first. So there's going to be no situation where you apply this internally to how you think about yourself and things that you feel about yourself that are inapplicable. Just the internal application still stands. So that still stands because if you're not going to be both a voluntarist and a socialist inside of yourself at the same time, that's schizophrenic. You're going to be one or the other, and you're going to probably be okay with it. Or hopefully, if you're not okay with it, then you can use these skills to get back into harmony. So there's that application. Interpersonally, I want to understand, I want to make this very clear. One would need to understand the anatomy of conflict to understand the application of what I'm describing. True conflict revolves around an actual dispute regarding the knowledge, understanding, and respect of who owns what, of boundaries, ownership, and property. Now, in the case of these two people, they might choose to not be friends because the voluntarist would declare that, he's self-declared voluntarist, would declare in his mind that he's so concerned about the lack of consistency, which he would identify with the term hypocrisy, in the socialist, that this type of lack of clear thinking in his mind, because it's not consistent, it's hypocritical, would lead to problems in their relationships in a variety of ways. Business deals, living properties next to each other, too close to each other, hanging out regularly with each other. He could see in his mind that this is a concern, a real thought and a real concern. Could real conflict actually happen? Could real misunderstanding actually happen? When it comes to whether this guy actually goes out and votes, to me, if you actually measure what voting actually does on the individual basis, it's not really that much different than rooting on a sports team. It's a fantasy. It's unless you actually hold political power and you're sitting on council or you actually truly are crossing the boundaries, ownership, and property of another person, then you have conflict. Conflict resolution is a different skill set than nonviolent communication. I could go a whole other show onto that one. That is a completely different thing entirely. What this has to do with is the internal conflicts inside of a person, and then externally just understanding that if you do have an actual agreement of who owns what, in other words, if these people are just philosophically speaking academically, then there's no real conflict because it's all in the realm of words, you know. If there actually was action taken by one person to take things of another, that's conflict. Conflict requires a different resolution process in general, and that is a completely different thing entirely. Because there are emotional components which these NVC skills address, but this is also in the realm of real measurement. Real trivium critical thinking skills are required. Real actual methodologies regarding third-party arbitration are required to resolve actual boundaries, ownership, and property that cross physical lines. In the realm of the academic and the thinking and words, these skills are very applicable. In the realm of actual boundaries being crossed, it requires other skill sets in addition to these. So I hope that sort of answered that one.
Right. So, moving on to that, we're kind of going, like, we're approaching to the end of the episode, but just as a direction, and then I'll pose this question to you. When it comes to actual conflict resolution, without going into too much detail, and that could be a future episode, do you move towards the humanizing idea, or do you move towards the dehumanizing idea when you actually get there? Does that make sense? Is that even a reasonable question? And what do you think?
I think I might not be alone in not knowing what you mean by a dehumanizing idea. So could you flesh that one out for me a little?
Well, going with the enemy imagery.
Okay.
Basically.
Oh, to really like hold that the other person is the enemy in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just see that as a disadvantage. I see it in the same way as it seriously would have disadvantaged me to have held a postal worker as my enemy, as a disadvantage to me moving through to my own internal harmony to achieve the objectives in my life, of which this is a very small part of my life. To suddenly make this person a much bigger part of my life and truly make them the ultimate enemy is putting myself at a disadvantage intellectually speaking. This is exactly why I very much emphasize the entire OFNR part as well as the 4Ds. There are a lot of NVC teachers and users who are extremely focused on identifying feelings and identifying what they call needs, and I call values and desires. And they have not in any way trained critical thinking skills to really identify all the observations, all the thoughts, all the strategies and actions, including all the requests of themselves and of other people. They have not identified a lot of variables going on, that there's a procedure that you go from knowing what your objectives are, knowing the effective actions to take to get to those objectives, and knowing the resources that you need to take those effective actions to lead to your objectives. That's called rational thinking. If you do not have that, you're lost, in my opinion. And there are many, many people who focus on strictly the OFNR part of NVC, and in my opinion, they're missing what I just mentioned. They're really missing it. So there are many people out there who don't use NVC because they only heard of the OFNR part mostly applied in that amateur kind of way. I'm sorry to use that term. In that limited way of just looking especially at feelings and needs, so-called, and not really getting all the variables. And just like anything, if you don't have all the variables, your results are kind of mixed. And so these people have dismissed the entirety of this methodology based upon that limited interaction. And they see that it feels great to hold other people as the enemy. It feels empowering. They are above those people. They put them in their mind as lower. I see that as a similar fantasy as the fantasy that you deserve other people to take care of your health care and your food and your shelter. you deserve everything, deserve-oriented thinking. I see it as a lack of clarity, as missing variables that are really important. So that's what I would try to respond to that. Like, there are opportunities in this world, and opportunities happen better when you have a methodology that yields you a predicted and desired result. If your results are doing great by holding enemy imagery for a variety of other people, as certain, say, talk show pundits will do, because, they get a lot of ratings by proclaiming serious enemy imagery out there, and they've made some big bank money on that. Well, the money part I see as success. The promoting of disharmony between people I see as huge tragedy, And at a certain point, my opinion is that tragedy is going to catch up to you, personally speaking, as well.
Right. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. So people can read the book. There's your interview out there with Nick Hazelton. I will link to both. Where else can people go to learn more about NVC, and where can they learn more about your expansion of the concept?
I really recommend people just take some time, go to my portfolio site, voluntaryvisions.com, and enjoy a variety of the productions that I've made with other people. I certainly recommend the Trivium Applied to Communication series that you can find on the the schoolsucksproject.com. That, don't let the name fool you. Schoolsucksproject.com is an excellent resource. I recommend that you consider studying at least critical thinking skills, looking up the Trivium method of critical thinking. I go and do a lot of productions on that as well. And really look into a lot of things that promote harmony and value. So that's what I want to put out there, Philip.
Thank you for coming on Value and Growth, Darrell.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was awesome to make a show with you.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview, and I hope that it inspires you to deepen your knowledge of NVC. You can find the book at valiantgrowth.com, NVC, and I just highly recommend it. It's been such an impactful book for me, and there's such a significant return on investment, I believe, from reading the book and mastering the technique and mastering the mindset that NVC fosters, that I can blanket recommend it to almost any person. There is a request that I would like to make to you, and that is to review the podcast in iTunes. If you're a regular podcast listener, you will probably have heard this request from many podcasters, and there's a reason for that, and that is that it helps the show out in the iTunes ranking, but I also think that it helps improve the quality of the show overall. So it doesn't have to be a 5-star positive review necessarily, and when real feedback is given, that's something that anybody producing content can learn from, and it can also help other people decide whether they want to listen or not. So if you want to increase the impact of the show and also its quality, I ask you to leave a review. I don't have too many at the moment. I think I have about 3 in the UK and 2 in the US at the time of recording, and that is not enough. So I would like you to maybe write it down somewhere, and when you have 5 or 10 minutes, go there and just write down what you think. Write down what impact Valiant Growth has had so far on your life, what the best aspects are, what are things you'd like to see improved. In just a few sentences, that would be extremely helpful, and it would make me happy. I actually have this subscription where I get notified when I get reviews periodically, and I've been getting these. No new reviews for Valiant Growth. So if you could change that, that would definitely bring a moment of happiness in my life, and that would be a great way of reciprocating the value that I give to you by producing this podcast. Now, I realize that not all of you are familiar with how to actually do it, and I wasn't before somebody asked me to do it for their podcast. But if you Google it, it's simple, and you will find some very good guides out there on the internet. Thank you, and I dare you to flourish today.